Villains can make or break any great story. From Voldemort to Darth Vader, Jafar from Aladdin, or even Thanos from the Avengers. What makes these villains so great is their drive, their focus, and commitment to oppose the protagonists in their story. Hi, I'm Loki, and welcome back to The Lair. Today we're talking about villains and what makes a good one. It was recently discussed in my public Discord between some of you guys, and what we quickly discussed and kind of understood as a whole is that not many dungeon masters are really using the types of villains that we as children feared and despised. Instead, and perhaps it's because of society that we live in currently, a lot of our villains that we see on television, that we use in our campaigns, are watered down and are presented as having lots of redeemable qualities, when in reality, villains don't need redeemable qualities to tell a good story. And I know it's a difficult line to represent a villain as truly evil or bad. You know, you might have to make them do things that are considered wrong or taboo in our society. Things that could upset or offend your players. It's important to obviously know your table, the kinds of players that you're with and what they like and dislike. But it's also very important that when we include sensitive content like this, that we do so in the most tasteful way possible. By that I mean, be considerate, be careful. I think less is more with stuff like this. Let your players imagine what's going on behind the door to the torture chamber. Don't actually tell them. The illusion of what's going on is truly the most powerful and intriguing thing the players' minds can go to wherever they feel comfortable. In our campaigns, it's good to have a villain your players really hate and despise. One of the big things that we as Dungeon Masters have difficulty doing is provoking emotions from our players. Whether this is joy, fear, sadness or anger. It's not the easiest thing to do because it requires our players to be invested in our stories, and that we as Dungeon Masters can actually lead them into that investment. And how can we do that? How can we emotionally charge our players? Well, there are a few ways, right? You can have your villain prevent the players from achieving a goal. That's an amazing way, right? Negatively impact something or someone that the party cares about, or oppose the party in regards to their core beliefs and tenets, right? Like, for example, a sorcerer who enslaves people. That's great because now your players can be liberators, right? And they can defeat the sorcerer and free the people, or maybe start their own settlement or something. Who knows, man? It's pretty sick. I think the best way to get your party to actually care about fighting and defeating a villain is to have that villain kill someone that they care about. Whether that's an NPC or one of the player characters themselves in a big fight that the boss manages to escape from, it really doesn't matter. What matters is the investment, because without investment, it really doesn't matter how epic your villain is, how cool their weapons and armor and backstory is. They're always going to fall a bit flat, and they're always going to be a bit of a joke. Some of my best villains have actually been like low tier enemies, like a bandit, or like a random bandit or a random orc who accidentally kills one of the player characters. And I say accidentally because it wasn't my intention for that bandit to kill them, but it just kind of happened, right, with dice rolls and shit. And they go on to become like a major villain. It happens more times than I'd like to admit to you guys. But one thing I think I and many of you guys probably struggle with is like introducing a great villain effectively. It's not the easiest thing to do, and to do it naturally, right? That's a big thing. Sometimes it's just better to go with the flow and promote some low tier enemies who've done well in the past into those villain roles, especially if you're running a sandbox campaign. I've had games where my players hated the local lord of the region, and I didn't even have a plan for them to hate this lord. They just decided that they didn't like him. And what I did is I decided to actually seed like more conflict into it. When I realized that they really didn't like this lord, I was like, okay, let's make them dislike this lord even more, right? Sometimes you just need to go with the flow and don't go against the grain. If your players want something and it seems logical and reasonable, why not, right? Players love to be right. I think it happened because they met the Lord, and the Lord didn't like the fact that the party didn't refer to him as my Lord, and they would speak when they weren't spoken to. And this obviously is very common and realistic in noble society. You know, the commoners treat nobility with respect, and even if you are a nobleman, you treat other nobility with respect, because that was kind of the way it worked. And a lot of medieval etiquette, it all goes over the head of most of my players, and it has, especially in the past. I think my players at the moment are a bit better kind of dealing with that kind of stuff, but I've had players who just can't fucking hack it, right? They took the Lord as being arrogant rather than just wanting to be respected, and it just kind of spiraled from there. You know, it's funny because sometimes I've gone the opposite way, and I've tried to make NPCs that my players really want to like and invest into, but they end up just getting invested in some fucking random dyslexic hireling who has 6 toes, you know, who I didn't really plan on introducing, but because I gave him a stupid voice, they immediately are in love with him, right? Sometimes your improv is like the best thing that you can possibly do for your players. I always think it's so important to be able to improvise and just jump into things on the fly, you know? I also think replayability is very important, especially for your villains. I don't like introducing a big villain just for them to die within a session or two. It feels very anticlimactic, and it just takes away the dopamine from your players that they could be getting from some long-term storytelling. You know, henchmen are great at kind of widening that gap, and you can have, before the party take on that nobleman that we were talking about, maybe they take on a knight who's been beating and coercing the peasantry into doing things. So let's widen that gap and allow these henchmen to kind of take on more minor roles, just so the players get to have a bit of blood without actually killing the boss yet, or even fighting him. Let's move on and discuss the big question that I feel like needs to be answered in this video. Should my villain be morally grey or pure evil? And to be fair, it's really up to you. You know, that much is true. But I find that morally grey villains aren't that easy to hate, and you risk alienating your players with, you know, redemption storylines for your villain. Players should be allowed to feel amazing when they finally defeat that big boss at the end of your campaign. And if you decide to have every big payoff be shadowed by some fucking moral quandary, or something like, oh yeah, well we killed the mass murderer, but he had a bunch of orphanages and he was taking care of orphans, now these orphans are gonna struggle. You know, it doesn't make your players feel good, and I've seen DMs do this quite a lot, and you've probably done it yourself, maybe, I don't know, you tell me in the comments. But it doesn't necessarily feel amazing. I do like moral quandaries, I just don't think they need to be used a lot, and I don't think you need to use them in order to take away from your players. And I know many people would defend themselves and say, well, I wasn't trying to take it away from my players, Loki. Well, you kind of were though, right? Like, you don't always need them. I feel like their moral quandaries should be used sparingly, is what I would definitely say. I think what I'm trying to get at with, you know, villains in general is that I like my villains to be a bit theatrical, a bit cartoonish. They are evil because they want to be evil, because they like being evil. The leader of a blood cult tortures and sacrifices people because he enjoys it, and he enjoys serving his god, and he has a powerful position within the hierarchy, so he's doing his job. And I think by making your villains big and bad, you're really setting them up for success, because they need to be able to rival the party. All of them combined, usually, right? They need to be a fucking badass. So make them one, you know? I also really don't believe that villains need to be well thought out in terms of their morality. It just seems a bit unnecessary. It's the same with it's the same as like coming up with reasons why NPCs don't like each other or don't like the party. Why two kingdoms would want to go to war with each other. It's a bit unnecessary. I remember back in school there was this big kid who transferred in like year 10, which is like 15 years old. And he was massive. He was like 6'2", 6'3", and one day he turned around to me in class and said, "Do you know what, Loki? You've got a face I really want to punch." right? I gave this guy no reason to dislike me. I kept my head down. You know, I was a bit of a class clown, but I didn't really get in anybody's face or cause anybody any grief. He didn't like me because he just didn't like me, or he didn't like my face. You don't have to have a good reason to dislike somebody, and you don't need to. If your players are saying, "Oh, why," you know, explain why it's like this, you don't really need to, right? You don't really need to, because human tendencies aren't that in depth. People love and hate for the most frivolous of reasons. Let me create a identity for a villain for you guys before I end this video, as an example, and kind of talk you through the things that you should focus on when making a villain. I'm just thinking it's a bit funny I told you the story about that guy at school. This was like 15 years ago, mind you, right? So anyway, let's focus on the example. The villain is a tyrant who, you know, rules the land and has been arresting anybody who stands against their rule and sending them to these mining camps in the Underdark. Yeah, which I think is really, really cool, right? I think Matthew Colville had something similar, The World Below. And I think this is a really cool idea for a campaign, so you should totally run it if you haven't got an idea yet. Do a campaign where the players start up on the surface, and they get to go into the world below, the Underdark. They get to go to these camps, they get to fight against Duragar and Illithid and all sorts of shit. I think that's super sick. But the tyrant's name is Philippe Facon. And I've called him that because my campaign's French. It's all like French characters and stuff. He's the lord of the land known as Aquitaine. Yeah, Aquitaine. Any Warhammer guys? What's going on, guys? How you doing? He's a nobleman with little combat experience. His strength comes from power, authority, and bloodline. He's handsome and proud, but lacks the charisma, or gab, to instill confidence. He has many powerful warriors who serve him and his family, including an order of evil paladins known as the Order of the Black Rose. He killed his father, the previous lord, though nobody knows. This is a secret. He and his wife have been having troubles conceiving an heir, causing doubt in his reign and problems with his bannermen. That's also a secret. He is paranoid that he will be killed the same way that his father was, by poison. So he is quick to arrest and remove people who he believes are a threat, including adventurers. This alone is enough information for me to get started, and it really only took me about 5 or 10 minutes whilst I was getting stuff ready today to really kind of put that together. Working on stat blocks and that kind of stuff is an entirely different subject and video, but I don't think it's too tricky. I'd probably just have him have the noble stat block. He's probably got like 10 hit points. I love the idea that like after the party defeat all of these powerful knights and wizards and shit, one of them just walks up to the lord and just beheads him with one swing. That just sounds so cathartic, doesn't it? I've done it before and it went really, really well. I think it was like the warlock, the Hexblade warlock, just like chopped off the guy's head. Oh, it was such a cool moment. Yeah. Anyway, I hope today's video has been helpful, everybody. I think it's important to remember that villains have a purpose in our campaigns, and that purpose is to be the enemy of the players. If anyone is going to kill your players, it's either going to be them or their henchmen, hopefully. All right? Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time on Loki's Lair. Until then.